All right. Well, it looks like we might be a small crew today, which is interesting because we've had some big numbers the last two sessions, but maybe people are just busy. Like I have a show this weekend, so I'm a little bit crazed, and I just got back from Georgia. So we'll see what people want to cover today, but smaller means more time for each of us, so it's all good. Um, so I'm going to run down the usual bits and bobs. I think everybody here is a prior attendee then. Nancy DeMulder, are you new or are you returning? You're brand new. Okay. Well,
No, no,
welcome.
you'll
Oh, no.
remember me. I talk a lot.
I will. Okay. Okay. Got it.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
really enjoying this. So here I am.
Excellent. Excellent. So I will freely confess that I have had almost no time to work on my own projects between last session and this session, but that just means that you guys get the benefit of some of the more foundational work that I'm going to be doing on the necklace that I pulled out last time that we were talking about how to change the stone directionality and that sort of thing. But I'm going to zip through the usual, just a reminder that this is once a month. You can come and go as you please. It'll be up on YouTube. I think we're caught up on the YouTubes right now. Be safe in your studio, and let's try and make this as much of a conversation as we can. I hope that you are picking at least one project to play along at home, but it's not mandatory. And whenever possible, I'll try to give you a sense of what I think I'll do in the following month. Um, Also, I am putting up the usual where to find me in the chat if you have not had a chance to follow me on various platforms and or see the YouTube link. It's also got a link to my workshops, which I did get my workshops for the year scheduled. I'm only doing two this year because my show schedule is kind of wacky. So there will be a virtual clasps class October 12th to 14th, and a virtual Hollow Forms December 13th to 15th, with a little asterisk beside that date. There is one show I'm waiting to hear about. If I don't get into it, I may move that Hollow Forms back into November if I don't have attendees yet that object to that, just because that's a little too close to Christmas for my comfort. But finding weekends that aren't taken up by other things is kind of crazy. Um, Also, as a reminder, if you didn't attend the first session, we talked a little bit about identifying what the projects are that you have in your particular box of unfinished things. Are they design blocked, materials blocked, techniques or skills blocked? You just can't stand the piece or some other reason, or it may be a blend of those things. So try to sort them out and figure out what is stopping you from finishing it, and work your way through it. Let's see. This time I was going to do a little bit of talking about what the deconstruction that I started to show last time has brought forth in my own work. And then I was going to work on the redesign of the piece that I started to show last time about why I sort of got jammed up on it and what some of the things are that are making me want to reconnect with it as a design. And had plenty of time to think about it while I was flying back and forth across the country. So I have a few ideas and I'm going to play around with those on screen today. Any questions about any of that? Yes, no, no, no. Okay, good, good. Welcome back, Deborah. Good to see you. All right, so does anybody have any projects that are on their bench that they right out of the gate are a little jammed up on and they want to share so that we can help you pass some ideas?
I brought a couple because I have like four boxes. So I just picked a couple out randomly. I
Okay,
don't know how well I'll be able to show them on the screen, but
okay.
I was thinking I would take a white piece of paper. So let's see. So this is a piece. Okay. Is that something you can see?
Looks etched or carved in some way
It's
or layered?
it's PMC actually.
Ooh, okay.
It's a piece of PMC that I took dried flowers that is on the front. And on the back, it had a lot of pitting. So I took a checkering file, right,
Nice.
to make
Yep.
lines in it, but it's
Cool.
not perfect still. So then I made this frame
Cool.
that is 14 karat.
Nice.
So the back is got, it sort of looks like cattails or
Yeah, I love
something.
that.
So, I mean, I played around with PMC. It's not something I'm going to do a ton of.
Yeah.
So when I put the two together, the way I did this was I have prongs
Yep.
that are sitting outside the rail.
Yep.
And on this side, I feel like I'm lacking prongs. So I have more. I've got two on this side and they're double prongs. So when I fold over, I'll be folding from the front and the back. And I have a bottom prong and a top prong, but I didn't put any prongs along here.
Right.
So one is because the back, I don't know how much more I want to take down,
Yep.
because it's got some pitting. I'm thinking the front that I would probably either put, blackjack or something on there
Okay.
to, really highlight the shape of the leaves, then polish it up.
Yep.
So what I'm finding, because I hadn't been at my bench for a long time, in the last 6 months, I've been spending bench time. So I'm getting back up to speed.
Yep.
But what I'm finding, I feel skill challenged. I used to work in a jewelry store. I've worked in lots of 14 karat. Haven't done it in a long time. So I'm like afraid, to get in there and either add a prong or, what I even putting the prongs over. I want to finish the piece, but the reality is I'm not going to make 1,000 more of these.
Right.
And I mean, I probably made this 15 or 20 years ago when gold was cheap.
Right.
Right. So I'm just wondering, should I invest the time in it? It's almost done. I do like it. One thing, Rachel, you've made me realize is that my aesthetic hasn't changed that much. It's
Good.
developed, but what I like and what I do, I'm building new things in, but like I said, I like florals, I like fossils, I like, constructing.
So is there anything besides the technical fear of the prong that is stopping you from finishing this?
Can I be lazy and just leave a little bit of pitting on the back of it?
So I had an instructor who taught me early on that when students ask that question, the answer is it good enough for you? Because it doesn't matter what I think or what anybody else on this call thinks. It's if it's good enough for you. If you are active, since you're actively thinking about it, it sounds like you have some challenges about leaving it that way. So what I would ask you is, are there opportunities to say, pierce away around the worst pits and leave it as pass through? Or are there stones you could set in the back? So it's an intentional divot that you create where the pit is, and then you flush set a cute little sapphire or diamond in that spot. Or so if you want something else, because your brain keeps sticking on that, you probably aren't happy with the pitting. But
Okay. Right. And that's actually great information, because the other thing is, one, to really see if the places, because as I'm looking at, again, it's not quite as bad as I remember.
right,
And two, the idea of, like you say, either setting a stone, or the way this back is decorated, there's already granulation. So I could put some little gold balls from
yep.
scratch on that, and that would echo what I've already got going on. And because I made this so long ago, part of my brain doesn't remember what I was thinking when I didn't put a center prong on one side. is maybe I can just trust that I had reason and I can make this work.
The other thing is if it needs a little more bling for you, because you sort of said it felt like it was missing something. What happens if you get a gold tube, a fairly heavyweight gold tube, and do an inset gold setting that you put a little cut in the side of the tubing below where the stone would hit so that you can attach that as your prong action. And it sets a little faceted stone at the top of it. So then it's the offset, because clearly you wanted an out of balance, like you intentionally didn't put them opposite and neat and positioned around each other, because there's something about the flow of the piece that didn't talk to that. Anybody
Right.
have other thoughts on this one? Can you show it again so people can take a peek again?
Yeah, hold on one sec.
So we're talking 14 karat frame and then fine silver.
Yeah, this is the PMC piece.
Yep, with flowers inset. Yep.
And then this is the frame.
I love
But
that
you know,
backing.
thank you. Though something you just said, I really like the idea of, and what occurs to me when you're saying tubing is maybe I should drill through the PMC in the spots I don't like and stick a piece of tubing in there and put a stone on the front, you know, I could do on the back, depending
Yeah.
on how big. So once again, this is like getting the ideas flowing about how to deal with things that were stymieing me. So
I'd also ask you, are you going to make a chain to go with it?
I am not. I've made many nice chains.
Yep.
I don't feel like people compensate me for that. So
Right.
no. I actually I display in my booth with a chain. Many people have a chain. They don't want to buy the chain, so I don't invest too much in chains.
Okay. Got
That's
it.
my
Anybody
experience.
have other thoughts for modifications to this piece? Okay. Well, I mean, I think you have some ideas to play around with, and you've, even though you weren't sure you were clearly articulating all the ways that it was stuck for you, it feels like prongs and that pitting and something missing from the capture are your three big elements. But
Yeah.
none of those, when you talk about them, actually sound like they're technique challenges for you. I mean, skills challenges for you. They're just procrastination because you haven't figured out what you want to do challenges, right?
Right. And the other thing, like I say, I was making jewelry for years and years, and I stopped for quite a long time. And what I've realized, because as I've been getting back into it, I'm making mistakes, but that's how you learn. So if I
Yeah.
go in there and I have a prong problem or whatever, I'll figure it out.
Yeah, and you know what? 14 karat gold, especially 14 karat yellow, white is really problematic, but
Yeah,
14 karat is just not great material for working with. If somebody is starting in gold, I recommend they go 18 karat yellow.
right.
Just because it behaves less crankily, I guess I would say. 14 karat is very stiff and it doesn't move the way that people who've grown up on silver especially are accustomed to, whereas 18 karat gold has a little bit more of that softness and malleability that we get in silver.
Right, right.
So
Well, yeah.
yeah,
And I have done a lot I was doing repairs and doing all sorts of stuff. So I've done a lot
good.
of 14. So I just have to kind of trust myself and also say, what I would have to pay now to make this in
Right.
14 even. So don't worry about it. Just,
Yeah,
make sure I'm in the right headspace to go.
absolutely. There are definitely gold soldering days and silver soldering days, and they are not usually the same day.
Right. Okay. Well, that's helpful.
Cool. I can't wait to see it finished. All right. Anybody else have something that they wanted some insights in that they want to say, help me get past my blockers? Deborah is posting some images. Oh, yay. Oh my gosh. You weren't kidding when you said you had a bunch of things to show us photos of. All right. So Deborah, talk to us a little bit about these three pieces you have posted in chat.
Okay.
And I will actually bring them up on the shared screen. So which one do you want to talk about first? Oh, Deborah, you may need to unmute yourself. Deborah, you there?
Mute. Got it. Is that working?
There we go. Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry,
So
it took me a minute.
that's okay. Which one would you
So
like
which
to?
one are we looking at? Because I can't see it right
So
now. I mean, I
I
have it.
haven't brought any of them up yet. Is there one you want to talk about first?
It doesn't matter. They're all kind of at a place where I need some input. I can pull my photos up here at home. I don't need to look at it on the screen.
Okay,
We just
but
need,
other
let's
folks
see.
will. So let me share my screen too.
Oh, that'd be great.
There we go. So
Okay.
they are looking at your ammonite piece.
Yeah, so I found this. It's a really thin, somebody ground it, so it's a really flat, thin piece. And I found I don't even know if I made it or I found something, but anyway, I cast the piece that's above it.
Yep.
So of course they just, you know, they seem like they go. Problems are let's see, the piece that's cast, it is hollow in the center, I
Okay.
think. I have to look at it again, but it is higher in
Yep.
elevation than the flat piece of ammonite. And that's what threw me in terms of figuring out, and I welcome any ideas that pop up.
Is the ammonite flat backed or does it have the same shape? And
No, well, it's kind of, somebody ground it down somewhat, but I wouldn't say it's flat. I would have to grind it down further.
oh, I don't know that I would go that route. I think
I know,
I
because
would
it'll
use that
break.
and
Yeah,
build your frame because it's gonna, yeah, those
yeah,
are real fragile.
yeah.
But the challenge with an ammonite, and I can, if it's easier, I can pull an ammonite out of my collection to show you guys this. But the challenge is it's got that lumpy, bumpy back edge, and trying to frame it is really rough. But then you have to rest it on something. So if you think of it as step bezel worthy, it's a good way
Oh,
to set
okay.
an ammonite because then you're making, in that case, I'll usually use a square wire or rectangle wire. And then I can file
Okay.
a little bit of curve into it if I need to or something. But you want a fairly consequential shelf for it that
Okay.
you put inside of the frame wall, or you build yourself a prong structure. Sort
Right.
of similar to what Nancy was just showing us, where it's got a kind of a cage and then prongs wrapping around it. It's just they're so fragile that if they get banged around from the back, they can really chip easily. But
Yeah, they
that
do.
yeah, but the act of building your frame is your opportunity to lift it up to match if you're trying
Oh,
to
you're
get your
right.
height
I could. It wouldn't
right.
matter so much, except the way it would look in the back.
The
Yeah.
other thing is I've seen people do castings of the back of their ammonite to make the support system for it. So you have a really good match.
Oh,
You
that's
have
an
to do a
idea.
little grinding down, but then you have
Mhm.
a build and you can create your wax that has prongs built into it or whatever you decide you want as the capture.
I mean, thinking on those terms, it would be interesting, and I don't think I'd get this lucky, but it would be interesting if I could put the one piece on the back of the other, but I'm sure they're not going to line up.
Um,
What were you hoping to make, if I can ask? Because I don't know if we're talking pendant or pin or.
I would say probably either a pendant or a, a pin, but I'm just at the beginning of, you take your pieces out that you have and you're trying to think of what you want to do with it. I'm at that beginning phase.
And how big are they? Are
that's
you
what I was
talking?
gonna.
Let's see. I would say they are, let's see. That one is, it's about an inch and a half, the bottom one. The top one is not exactly the same, but probably I'd say it's an inch and a half wide
And what's
by
you said it's hollow, the upper one? What's the kind of rough weight?
the upper one is hollow. And so it just was cast on the outside, the outside dimension is on the top
Right.
and the
So
inside is hollow.
is it, is there a flat against the back or is it the
No,
inside?
hollow, by hollow, I mean, no, There's
So,
nothing but the shell on the front. Yeah.
so here's my first reaction to seeing that is that they're a little heavy together,
Yeah, they
is my
are.
gut response. But boy, if you made a box clasp out of that silver piece to go at the opposite end of a necklace that has the hanging pendant, so you've got sort of polars, that would be such a cool box clasp. It'd be a challenge because
It's
you'd
a
have to
little,
get the frame
do you
onto
think
that.
it's kind of large for a box clasp?
Um, it depends on the weight of the chain you've got connecting them, right? So if you've got
Yeah.
something solid in between,
Hmm.
uh, or you make it as a center clasp. So you could do something where your clasp goes down into the front of it and then your stone is set somewhere offset from it. But what it feels like to me, like this is big
Yes,
and clunky and they're both beautiful, elegant swirls unto themselves, but
right,
they don't
separately.
really easily flow into each other in my eye. That's just my take on it. Anybody have other thoughts about these two pieces?
Well, if you go on that line, it might be interesting to figure a way to make the two connect by the actual ammonite doing something like a prong setting or a bezel setting,
Hmm.
the other part, and have nothing but chain behind it, so that that was actually the centerpiece. That is the necklace.
The
You
chain,
mean
you mean?
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, you'd probably want to make your own chain. You don't have to, but that would be interesting.
So
are
by
you
the
envisioning?
chain, by
Go
the
ahead.
chain, do you mean like, let's say 4 lengths of chain?
No, what I mean
Or do you
is
mean
one,
one?
they would be the clasp, but the
Oh,
clasp
okay.
would close at the front, and
Oh,
you
I get it.
wouldn't
Okay.
necessarily have anything else but chain.
That's
So that
interesting. Okay.
So one of the things that is worth doing when even if you only have photographs of what you're laying out is to do this rotation on it, right?
Uh-huh.
And I'm going to actually copy this into a program that I can do a little bit more than just rotate it 90 degrees.
Okay.
And then we can maybe play around with separating them and putting things together. So this you would do on your sketch pad, or if you're working graphically, if you like doing stuff on camera, nothing says you can't take photographs of all the components and play around with them. Bear with me, this takes a little bit to
Right.
load. But let's get into Corel. Start a new, actually, let me do file new from clipboard. All right, so if we have this, and I am gonna strip out that red background, if I can. I've got way too many programs to do this in, so they each have different features. Let me try Canva, actually.
Yeah, usually it'll plop it out.
Yeah, Canva's the best I have for taking out backgrounds, so. Design. Come on, paste for me. There we go. All right, so if we take out the background so we're not distracted by the red and we can just think of, wow, my system is moving slow today. We can just think of the pieces. There
Oh,
we
it's
go.
wonderful.
And then, come back. And then we can trim it out a little bit. I'm assuming that's just the
It's a
casting.
sprue. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so let's trim this down. And again, I'm just using Canva, which has, if you need something to help you with like social media creation and so on, this has such great built-in features, and they've been adding AI features. So all I'm doing is copying the piece and replicating it. So you can start playing around with how they're positioned relative to one another
Oh, cool.
and just see what you do and don't like, like when they go opposite one another versus when they're hanging out. And you could even probably in something like Canva, you can find, let's look for some Where do they have that? Photos,
Chains. Oh, look at
right?
that.
So we can look for some chain links. Let's go with gold chain instead or something. I don't know if you want to work in gold or silver, but so you can take that
That's
idea.
kind of what I thought of between the two when you were talking about chains.
Yeah. So it could be, oop, I want to send that all the way to the back,
I thought that's what you did. There we go.
right? And play around a little bit with getting rid of the background again. So now as soon as we start to
Wow. Yeah,
piece these
that's great.
together, we obviously we can't play around with size on this, but you could make your chain smaller relative to the scale of whatever we're working on. I don't know what's the right length of chain.
So if you turn that silver one around, I think that's what we were thinking of, right? Yeah,
Like that.
that's interesting.
Right? So, and this, like this, you don't have to go high tech with this. You can do, if you have photocopies or a printer that you can print them out, play paper dolls, cut and paste, cut out your images and your objects and put them on your screen. Or I've talked to you guys in the past about that gold and silver foil that I like working with for templating things. So you can get three-dimensional. You can always model things in copper if you want to save some money, although I tend to model in silver just because it's the material I'm most comfortable working in. But so play a little bit. Anybody have other ideas? Reminder that they sort of were originally shown to us as a pair like this.
They originally just, and the only reason why they're together was because they're opposing spirals. It just
Yep.
kind of hit me that way.
Which is cool and might be part of what you build into your design because we've got the flow there. There's a little bit of disconnect right around the edge
Right.
here, quite spiral fully. But
Mhm.
as soon as you know that you like that connection, then you can create some kind of relationship between them, even if there's distance that still continues that spiral, right? So thinking about what gives the same concept.
I think
And
the distance of what you did with the chain in between really worked just because they don't have to be, precise.
yep.
Yeah.
So then it would be, how do you get them to stay in the position you want relative to what you've done? Is it going on a plain silver chain? Is it going on multiple links? If I were doing this kind of connection, what I would be building into my work is a series of jump rings along whatever I'm using to frame the piece. Or I would
Right.
on silver, I could solder them directly to the edge of the piece. On this, it will have to have something in my capture. And
Yeah.
then each one would be attached to that, and that'll keep it from twisting on itself. But you got to then continue that idea. If you just put a single point on the end of either of these, they're going to flip on this side instead,
Yeah, they are. Mhm.
right? So there's some technical challenges in how you lay it out, but that act of just separating them from each other a little bit still creates that relationship. You can think about what kind of shapes you want in here for link shapes, something that is more wave-like or whatever. Or even, this doesn't have to be chain links. If you make it more stable, let's see, silver rod. So
Like a half round, maybe, or
yeah,
a rod.
so I'm betting we won't be able to get that fancy with what I can
No,
get
we
out
won't.
of all pictures. Silver half round. Let's see what they've got. Nope, they really are not here for jewelers. Silver jewelry. Oop.
Because of the weight of those pieces, I would imagine that one of the first things I would look to is where do I want them to sit on the neckline?
Yeah,
Because that would tell me a lot about how I can connect the two of them together and how it will sit. I would imagine you might need to have at least two pieces of chain, if not three, to
Right.
get some flexibility. And that would then start dictating some of the other factors, like Rachel was saying, about how you're going to keep it from flipping, how you're going to attach whatever choices or, to make it a complete necklace.
Just talking this way, I was thinking that maybe I would go away from chain to keep it from flip-flopping and keeping it stable, and maybe going to creating my own flat chain made out of silver stock,
Mm-hmm.
or filigree or something, that once I
Ooh.
attach it however I do to each piece, it's not going to go anywhere because it's more stiff.
Boy, can you imagine a filigree version of this where so then you're adding a third component that parallels your spirals here. Filigree,
Yeah, wouldn't that be interesting, huh?
right? Or a
Yep.
chain that alternates with the objects that you've got, and you just could put these components in.
Yeah,
Lots of
that's interesting. Hadn't thought of that. That's why
um,
this is fun. Thank you, Rachel.
sure.
Hey, and while you're all saying that, my mind goes to the idea of making a plate that is pierced, perhaps, that these are set either on or to the end, something like that. But just another concept.
Yeah, so
Then
that's creating a centerpiece.
yeah, and then you wouldn't have any flipping to worry about, It's just when you
Right.
said filigree, I thought piercing, and what Rachel was saying about, echoing the shapes within the ammonite. So just another possibility.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much.
So when you say silver plate, I think, are we making the little platter handles? Because that's pretty cool,
That's an
right?
idea.
So definitely, I'm doing it on screen because it's easier when I'm presenting to you guys, but this is the kind of thing that I'll doodle in my sketchbooks variations for ages, or I'll
Right,
just start making things and know that I'm going to have some scrap material from it.
right.
Any other ideas from anyone else on the crowd? Any thoughts on these ammonites? Okay. Anyone, before we do one of your other pieces, I want to see if anybody else has something they want to show um, to get feedback on.
I
Anyone
came in
else?
late. I'm sorry, I came in late.
That's
I had
okay.
something else to do, but I do want to show something that I recently made, but I had a really hard time with the actual like riveting because I didn't want it to necessarily be a hollow form, but I wanted that idea.
Okay. I'm curious now because rivets and hollow forms aren't always together. Holy cow, woman.
This is from my drawings.
Yeah.
Very nice.
I
Thank
see
you.
the old hollow form shape that you did when you were in the class. That's amazing. That's
Yeah,
come through to, these are fabulous.
thank you.
So what was it that you were frustrated by?
This part here, the riveting. It was hard for me to do the riveting.
Okay.
And
Um,
I was wondering if you had any ideas because I ended up soldering and then trying to rivet and some of them collapse.
got it. So the sheet metal, that's brass, right? I'm assuming?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The sheet metal feels a little thin, so it may have limited how much pressure you could have put while you were doing your riveting. And it looks like you're doing tube rivets, yeah? So you're pushing down, you're flaying the tube out.
Yeah.
So brass is really, really stiff and hard. If you had done those same things in lightweight silver tubing, the rivets in lightweight silver tubing, I think you might have had less trouble with them. Simply because trying to force brass to splay, first of all, make sure you anneal the tube like crazy, no matter what metal you're using.
See how it kind of collapsed?
Yeah, I see a little bit of sort of pooching out on a couple of them, I think. It's a little hard to see because it's not getting very focused, but yeah. And so some of it may be that one in the back side looks like maybe you had the angle of your spots a little off.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Really
that's
off.
part of why that one seems to have adjusted. You're also, what do you do? Were you soldering wire to one side and tubing to the other by the time you were done?
I soldered wire. I added the tube to reinforce it.
Yep.
And then I tried to rivet it, but then it was collapsing on me. I mean, I
So what's,
love the idea. I mean, I
yeah, it's
love
beautiful.
the heftiness, and that's what I was looking for. But it was just so hard to get that going.
So what were you using as your riveting tools in this scenario?
Um, I used brass rod and then brass tube.
And what actual tools were you pushing? Were you doming or mushrooming or
I was using the hammer, just a little hammer.
so a ball peen or a riveting hammer or like what shape was the head of the hammer that you were using?
Um,
And
I
what
was
were you
using,
riveting against?
Yeah, were you up against a steel block on the other side?
yes.
Okay. So the flat end of that hammer is
Mm-hmm.
great if you're doing a wire rivet, although I would try to find one a little thinner edge than that, because a riveting hammer is usually, do I have mine handy? I don't have mine handy. A riveting hammer is usually a very, very narrow
I
top.
have several.
Wow, those are really, really thick compared to what I'm used to using for riveting, unless you're doing really huge rivets. But the smaller the edge,
I have several.
of the three you've got up, the little silver one is the best.
This
But if
one?
you can grind that that flat end, so if you're doing let me draw a little bit. Let me switch over to show you some drawings of the tools and the techniques. Let's see. Oop, wrong one. There we go. What I have there right now. And let's do a little doodle. So if you are dealing with a mushroom top rivet, which is wire basically, right? Your goal is to get this kind of a shape to it, right? Mushroom
Mhm.
top. And you're starting with wire that's usually fairly heavy gauge relative to everything else. And it needs to fit the hole impeccably, like no wiggle room.
Mhm.
What you're going to be doing, if we're looking at the top of this, is with that flat end, you're going to be doing some hammering on this line and then on this line. And what'll start to happen is it'll start to sort of burble out into like 4 quadrants, and then you'll do some this way and this way. And what you should start to see at the top is that it starts to do this. Okay.
Mhm.
And that's, again, there's got to be something hard on the opposite side of it. So a steel block is usually a good call, or leather on top of a steel block if you're really worried about marring things. And then over time, because you've got your wall that it's pushing up against, over time, you're tapping a little bit around the edges and not necessarily just straight across, but you got to get that centering starting it thing and then work it into the mushroom dome. Okay, so that is really, it's about the right hammer and that right set of combined action to it. However, if you're doing a tube set, it's different, because the tube set is actually, if you were like me and you grew up sewing and had those little the little rivet caps that you have the squeezy machine that you could try to get them set in, and they'd come with one mushroom half that was already started. That's
Mhm.
essentially what you're doing with a tube setting, and that counts on you having the sheet. The soldering down to the bottom plate is a great call in that case, because then it's a stable base. But we've got this sheet that is just under it. In that case, what I'd do is I'd take my dapping set and I'd start with one that fits very solidly big in the hole. And I'd be hammering down with a ball peen or something on top of that. And if it's not reacting and it's not starting to flare, I drop the ball size down to just barely fitting in to really get it started. And then move out to a bigger one as it flares so that you're continuing to push it outward. Does that help with the exercise of?
So I'm soldering the bottom.
Well,
And then
if you want something super stable, just solder your tube on and then you're drilling the hole that the tube is going through. But again, it's got to be a really snug fit. You can do this without that, but then you need to do flaring on both sides, right?
Mhm.
Which is a little more problematic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If you are really getting like a small piece, the big pieces you've got will be a little hard to do this, but a small piece, if you're going to do tube to tube, what you do is you set up in your vise, you set up one ball at the bottom instead of a steel block and the other ball coming down from the top. This is essentially a version of how I would dap out a spinner ring. Right, so
Okay.
one dap
Okay.
as solid and not moving, the other dap, and then you flip your piece over, so you're getting hammer action from both directions. But by having a dap and a dap, it starts to
Mhm.
flay both of them equally.
Okay. Okay.
Or you solder one side of the tubing down and you flay the other one. But it's whatever it is, it has to be a super, super snug, like no air gap. It should be hard to press through, fit for any of these to be inside of the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, challenging. Any questions on that?
The comment I would make is for years, I was never successful at riveting because I was afraid to cut it short enough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
So
it is. It's a good call out that it's barely fitting over the top because otherwise you're trying to force it too far out. But also another part of that success is how well have you annealed it? Because it's way harder to get that flare to keep moving because every time we tap it, we're work hardening right at that curve point, right? That's the place that's taking all of the bend pressure and tightening up. So unless it's good annealed material from the outset, it's going to be more difficult. And brass, of course, is going to be much harder to get well annealed.
Mm-hmm.
So you were fighting a couple of uphill battles on that fabulous piece of yours there.
When you talk anneal, you're talking about the actual rod itself to be anneal or the
Yeah.
actual wire itself?
Yep. The tube, if
Okay.
it's the tube set, the wire, if it's the wire set, because you are work hardening it with every blow of the hammer that you put down onto it. And you want it to be able to mush out the way you want it mushed out, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Anything else we can help you with on that one? Because it's a pretty spectacular design and I hope it's going to become a series.
Yeah, I'm trying to work it on a series. I can show you the earrings.
Yeah,
They
hang
got
on a second. Let me switch out of me and back to you.
these got really bad.
Spotlight.
Oh,
got
they're
smashed.
cute.
Oh, so fabulous.
They got, see how smashed and
So,
Oh.
wait, let me see that side view of the earring that got smashed. So it looks like you did wire and tubing.
yeah,
So you used a tubing divider, right?
right.
You did a ball on one end of your wire and then hammered the other side.
I did. I tried to
Okay.
do a ball on both.
Okay. Oh, you tried to do
I
heated
tried to
ball,
do
like,
a ball and then
yep,
another ball.
got it. So that whole set looks very loose to me. It looks like your
Yeah.
tubing fits snugly around your wire. And it looks like because of that, it started to tilt and then you got the gapping and it made it worse. Doing a flamed up ball on one end to start and then the hammer crosshatch that I was just describing. I rarely try to do, if I want a true rivet and not just a connector, I don't try to do both sides balled up. I try to
Mhm.
do one side balled up with flame and then snip close, like Nancy was saying, and then flat hammer until, I mean, it may have a tiny little dome, but I'm not going to try to keep it balled up. I'm going to try and really work it flat. And the trick in that one is putting it over something so that the ball that you created underneath doesn't get squished,
Mhm.
right? So that you could put between your GRS block with some leather or something like that. But what you need is enough surface support to keep the tapping working. And it's not hard tapping, guys. This is like bam, 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 not whap, whap, whap. This is delicate, lots of hits instead
Yeah.
of a few really hard hits.
Yeah.
I have a question, just so I understand this. So the stock, the flat silver or brass that you're using, that has to be unannealed, right? So that it's stable. before you
Uh,
use? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd probably help things if it was a stiff, hardened piece. I'm more concerned because it'll be more likely that you'll mar if you miss your hammer blow and stuff.
Right.
But it also depends on the gauge. Like heavier gauge is going to be a lot easier to put a rivet into. So it doesn't hurt to have it hardened, work hardened before you the sheet metal to be work hardened. It's not always possible depending on what else you're doing with it.
Maybe you should do a class on riveting.
So I don't use enough riveting to do a specialty class on it. I'll try to
Okay.
find a project where it makes sense to do a rivet or two. It's just not in my normal techniques wheelhouse because I don't use it in my own work. There's I think Lucy Walker has a good class on a good video on riveting. And I'll try, there's somebody else that I'm forgetting that I know I've seen little mini workshops on. And then if you can find it, I don't know if there's a video of him, but Robert Lopez's tool that he has to help support rivets, which I hope he starts making again one of these days, because it made me go, oh, I would use more rivets if I had that tool. So yeah, it's
Yeah,
practice.
because for me, it's the soldering. So it's just like I'm trying to do the soldering and then, I do such a bad job sometimes and I just, I mean, sometimes it's great and it works and the flows, but then the mess and then just the fire scale and everything. That's why I was like, okay, I need to start riveting again.
Let's talk about that. You put a whole lot of questions into that one little statement because you're talking about brass now.
Mm-hmm.
So here's a trick for fire scale on brass because it's not quite the same as fire scale on silver. Fire scale on brass is because fire scale is caused by copper and there's a lot more copper in brass, right? So what you're actually talking about is that when it goes red, when you're heating and soldering and so on, it gets all really red. The trick to clear
Can you
that.
spotlight yourself?
Oh, sure. Sorry.
Thank you.
The trick to dealing with the bright red copper layer that comes up is you need to do what's called a super pickle, which is wow, it just went right out of my head what I'm adding to my pickle to make super pickle. Anybody got it off?
Hydrogen peroxide.
Yes, thank you.
Hydrogen-
Hydrogen peroxide. So you scoop out your regular pickle and put it in a glass bowl or something like that, and you put equal parts of the pickle and the hydrogen peroxide, but it only lasts for about 15 minutes. And it's very, very important that you watch it while it's in there and have, like, I usually use a Q-tip. It's going to start getting bubbles on top of the material. And what you do is you sort of brush the bubbles down and flip the piece over and brush the bubbles. That is going to go take all that coppery nastiness off of your brass. The other thing is, you're saying you're having trouble soldering. If you're having trouble soldering brass, it's a temperature and solder type thing, because brass needs to get so much hotter to get solder flow that you might want to just use easy solder if you're going with silver solder. And I have yet to hear of anybody coming up with a decent brass solder. There's
Yeah,
a
I've
copper
bought the
solder
brass.
out there. I would never use it. It's awful.
Yeah.
It's like kludgy and gummy and doesn't flow. It just lumps. So I would probably try using easy solder on my brass and go from there. If you're doing copper work and you use silver solder, then what you want to do is save up the next time your pickle gets really, really blue, save a glass jar of it and use it to intentionally copper plate, because the blue is the copper in there. Intentionally copper plate your silvery bits from the solder. And the way that you do that is you put your piece that's been soldered into the super blue pickle, and you put a little scrap of like iron binding wire or an iron nail or something like that, and you touch it to the places on your material. It may take a minute or two to get started, but you touch it to the silver solder area and it will bind the copper down and plate. And so it hides the solder amongst your copper. So there's things that you can be doing when you're working with other materials that'll help make it look snazzier by the time you're done. So, and then the other thing on rivets, gang, make a pair of heavy back brass sheet plates, because those are gonna not move a lot. They're gonna be nice and solid, but like get a 14 or 16 gauge pair of sheets, drill a whole bunch of holes in them that match whatever your wire or your tubing, depending on what you're practicing, and just use it to, on a sheet, just one after the other, rivet, 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 rivet. That's the way you're going to get good at those. And
Mhm.
try different combinations of tools to see what makes you happiest.
Mhm.
But yeah, I'm usually starting all my rivets with that cross edge. And only if I'm really trying to get a textured dome will I then move over to the other side of the riveting hammer and do a little tap, tap, tap to finish it off. But my first goal is function and then form. Questions on that sidetrack?
Mhm. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
A lot of information there.
Yeah. Anybody else have something they want help with to get past a hurdle? Okie doke. Then I'm going to bring us back to my bench and show a little bit of what I have been destroying and keeping. So I had a big old pile. Come on, focus. There we go. And a bit higher. And a little bit rotated. So this is most of my destroy pile, most of the salvage from my destroy pile, from what you saw when I was first sorting my box of things. I still have a couple more pieces I want to take apart, but this does not include all the scrap silver that came out of it. These are the pieces that I was trying to save.
Mhm.
And so there's a whole boatload of stones that can go back into purpose. Some of them need a little scrub down and so on. And there's a few pearls of different sorts that I now have available for something else. And then there's a pair of earring posts that I'll be reusing for that collection that I do the scrap water droplet posts. And then there's a couple components that just are too interesting to scrap. This was a piece that was, I'll talk at some point about the stages of scrap material that what they go through in my pile. But these are just some really interesting scrap pieces that I fused together and then rolling milled to get that highs and lows thing. And I really liked them when they were together, but the stone cracked before I even got it set. And so this was one of my lost stones. I suppose I could have somebody refinish it because it's not a terribly bad crack for me. But I lost, this one chipped. This was taken apart. It was a set of earrings that one of the stones had cracked when I dropped it. I have pieces that I didn't take all the way apart because they will become parts of my collection that I use these pendulums for. So I can leave them in that state, and I just recovered the stones for now. I have some ring bands of varying sorts. These will probably end up in scrap or turned into something else. Couple of settings I was able to salvage that may or may not be salvaged enough. This one's a little weak looking. This one looks pretty solid and ready to set something in. I got a bunch of chains back, which is great. Chains are expensive. And I had some salvageable mokamegane. It's small, but it may make some earrings or something, and a few hollow form pieces that I may or may not be able to do something with. So not a bad scavenge, right? That was a couple hours of destruction, and then a whole pile of junk silver that's going to go into the recycling bin. Questions about any of that? Anybody else doing a lot of destruction in their collections? Nobody's gotten to
donated.
this. Huh?
When I did my destruction, I kind of donated it or melted it, so it's like I still haven't done that.
What do you mean you donated? You gave it to other people to work with?
Yeah,
Cool.
like sometimes I go through phases, and I don't know. I go
Oh,
through
you mean you donated the finished work? If it was, instead of destroying it, you donated it.
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
cool. Yeah. Yeah, we didn't even talk about that. Yeah, just because it's not in your current style, like you don't have to destroy perfectly well finished jewelry. Most of my destroy stuff is because I didn't care for it. That rather than that it was, not what I'd sell now. But I also, so I do several big donation things. I will often give to charity auctions for causes that I'm involved with. There's a cause in the New Hampshire area for a friend's charity for blindness. I will, I actually make, I have a project called Buy a Pair, Gift a Pair, and my local Dress for Success gets a pair of earrings to give to their constituents for every pair that I sell.
Great.
So there's, yeah, lots of things that you can do. And then if you don't know about it, Snow Farm Crafts, which is a craft school, longstanding craft school in New England, has the seconds, the annual second sale. A portion of that goes to their scholarship fund, and the rest of it comes back to the artist. And so a lot of people, any collections they're selling off, it's not actually always seconds. Mine are usually just the pieces I'm no longer putting out. So there's a lot that can be done with your jewelry besides destruction. These are things I destroyed because I want the materials back. The stones I want to do something more interesting with, or because I never finished it fully, or, you know, it's not of the caliber that I wanted it to be. So yeah, find ways to donate. That's a great thing. Oops, I'll put these over with the others or I'll lose them.
I don't know if any of you have heard of the group Ethical Metalsmiths,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they also have a yearly project where they accept donations, and it can be anything that's jewelry related. And then jewelers who are members can participate in gathering some of the things out of the quote unquote junk pile and repurposing it. And then
Right.
it's sold. So that's another very interesting way to reuse and send it on.
Yeah. I know the Seattle's Metal Guild at times has done a refurbished thing where there's a recycling center on the West Coast that gathers even things like your jewelry if you're getting rid of it. And if it gets donated and it's broken, as a lot of it is, the Smiths at Seattle take it and fix it up and then send it on to their local Dress for Success. So there's a lot of things we can do. All right, so we're on to some actual recreating or expanding of designs. And this was this stone. Oops, I'm on the wrong screen. Bear with me. So this stone, which is a beautiful piece of quartz druzy that needs a little cleaning, that was cut by Joe Jelks of Horizon Lapidary out in Delaware, who does a lot of the stones that I use for this collection. That's going to need a little bit something more to clean off, I think. But so this piece was just a little too boring for me in a plain old bezel. It was sort of getting yellowish. It was not very exciting. And even then last time I cut this down to try and make it more interesting, but still it feels too lightweight and too wussy of a bezel for me. So at the very least, I know I want to go with a thicker gauge wall around it, but I also may want to do a partial bezel. I may want to do something more unusual with it. And so I don't have any of the sketching that I've been doing because they've really been doodles, but I'm going to draw a couple of thematic things I've been thinking about. Last time, I got really excited as soon as we turned it on its side. Let's get grubby. So merely the act of repositioning the stone helped make it more interesting to me. And it was going to hang down. Oh, I need to zoom out a little bit for you guys. It was going to hang down and it was going to have something sort of this-ish kind of connectivity. My gut when I was building it up was that I wanted to keep these extra wires on here for some reason, but it's sort of just as a necklace. As soon as I started playing with directionality of it and changing how the position went of that stone, it starts to intrigue me more than it did. but it also calls for possibly changing out how I connect these pieces. So, and one of the things that appealed to me about the extra bits is I really, really love this connection segment in between, where there's another little shape that gets crafted in the middle. So I'm thinking that somewhere around here is where I'm going to do connector and connector, so that there is movement on the neck where it hinges basically. And that also means that I've got to sort of engage a little bit more in how the shapes connect in directionality. You know, like I don't know whether I'm connecting them all the same way, end to end. What am I going to do with it? The other thing is that I feel like this may need something more to counterbalance it. So turning it on its side, one of the things that I really love about those stones is how much they contrast the texture of the druze with the high polish that he puts on it. So I started thinking, well, what happens if I run with that texture and maybe make the shape repeated? So it would be something along the lines of, that pen is not going to show up well enough, a thicker pen, something along the lines of this as my main pendant. Is that showing well for you guys, or is that,
Yes.
you see that? However, I do not want all druze on that. I mean, all reticulation on that. If I'm going to do reticulation, I either want it to just be the center, so it's the other half of the piece, and this would be high polish, or at this point, I'm thinking I want to do the opposite, and I'm going to do, this is all going to become either negative space or high polish, or I'll put some kyumbu on it. And so that was as far as I got on my airplane flight back, because I was thinking, well, what the heck am I going to do with this project when I get here on Wednesday? Any thoughts, any questions on that?
I'm just curious, the area where you were talking about having a high polish, have you thought of having it be an open space? Because I like the way that might echo the other pieces of the frame.
So for example, druzy here, and then this would be open, and I'd
Or
create
the opposite, the place that's blackened, the triangle shape that you were saying would be a
Yeah.
high polish. Yes,
would be, yeah, the other option was, is it negative space?
right,
So
exactly.
cut away. And then, yeah, that is absolutely one of the possibilities that would work with this look, because it opens up. The challenge being, that's still bugging me, is I don't know what I'm going to back this stone with, because it looks different against silver, against gold, against whatever clothing someone is wearing if I do open space. So the stone itself is really spectacular, but as soon as I put it on anything, it changes the tonality of it. And so
Can you put it on white? Is the white going to help?
that's what I like the most of the colors of my white piece of paper that I had a moment ago. Oh, there it is. Put my stones on it. But even then it gets kind of yellowish to me, right?
Okay.
So I'm not sure. What I haven't tried it on is black. I should see what it, or gray, and ooh, against gray, it looks kind of nice. So I might have to blacken the back of it, the back plate. Let's see if I have any black handy. Usually have a piece of black paper. There we go. No, I think the black still wipes it out. I think gray is the way to go. So this may need to have backing of, may need to be backed by a light Goseba coating that I've polished back until it gets what I want it to be, right? And then when we put, yeah, see, that starts to become way more interesting to me, that color combo. And then this could be blackened, whatever, whether it's the outer or the inner that I'm using, would be blackened as well. I'm a big fan of the flip-flop thing, so I think my heart is going towards the exterior reticulation, and then something, either negative space gold or the high polish would be in that opposite position. So let's see what it looks like when we put a little gold in that spot. Yeah.
How would you connect it? Like the reticulation and the stone, would it be like,
Well, that's my next challenge, and that's where we get to when we're doing this kind of an exercise is what are my technical limitations? Oop, I cut it the wrong direction. Hang on a sec.
because when I see what you've done with the other parts that are going to be connected,
Yep,
I see part of it as just being prong setting, like,
could be. Yeah, so one of the things I was debating was if I go gold, would
uh-huh.
I put a prong that has a gold ball that comes down to hold the opposite side so the stone is open other than that? So we'd be going with something, if there's gold in the middle,
Mhm.
that kind of adds a little pizzazz to it, but it may detract from, I may actually paste it, glue a little piece of this back plate because I really like it in the gray. Got for tape. Not that. Yeah, I'm liking this gray backed stone. So that's my stone, and then I've got a little gold. I think the gold may detract from the beauty of the crystal. The crystal is pretty delicate on this piece. So negative space possibly is the next choice.
What about playing with liver of sulfur with that? Because I do like the gray.
Yep.
I think it
So-
brings out something in the banding that is lighter than if you were to use black. But then if
Yeah.
you were to play with the way you use liver of sulfur to highlight or darken, then that triangle area, instead of having gold, it could be darker, perhaps, and some of
I'm
the other reticulation could be lighter. And
Yeah,
highlight.
I'm thinking I would be going Gosiba or liver of sulfur on the outer edges, and then this would get high polish instead. So this would, because then they reverse each other. Or the more that I'm looking at this, the more I like the idea of this being a negative cutaway and only this part being the reticulation and blackened. And if I do a cutaway there, I could debatably cut away from behind the stone too, just enough that whatever color from their clothing is peeking through this cutaway, I also have the same color behind the stone. And then the question becomes, is it this way? Is it this way? You know, where do we position it? So I think what I need to do to prove this one out is come up with a cutout of the piece that I like best of this reticulation, whichever I decide that is. Which probably is the area that I was drawn to first. So I need to cut my shape and cut away some negative space and see how I like the piece of reticulation. One of the nice things about reticulation silver is that you can melt it down, roll it back out, and re-reticulate it if you need to. So keep those scraps separate. This is actual reticulation silver. This is silver that I made using John Cogswell's recipe for it, which is, I want to say 93%. I'd have to look at my notes. but he has a higher silver percentage than a lot of the manufactured brands do. So I think that's what I'm gonna head to. So I'm gonna template this shape and mirror it, which I think I'm gonna do in the paper. And I may need to go a little bigger because I may want to frame all of it. I'm thinking that, draw for you guys what I'm envisioning. So rather than it just being the rough edge, I'm envisioning a rectangle wall that is bezel for the stone part, but keeps the continuity of the two pieces. So if my stone is here, I've got bezel here, rectangular wire framing it, and then rectangular wire framing the reticulation. It just continues on, and this would become my negative space. So this is actually empty. And what that gives me is support on three sides, and then I just need, as you were headed towards, Carmen, some kind of prong, maybe. Here and here would do it. I could get away with fewer, or I can make it turn a corner so that let me actually draw my bezel in a different color so you guys can actually see it. So this is the rectangular wall bezel that is also going to act as a frame. And I could just put a tiny little smidge in front of the stone, so that I've got a little bit of bezel and a little bezel, or I can use a prong, or I can, there's a lot of different options for that. And I want to see it against the reticulation backplate combo, because at this point I have to build a backplate that is flat for the stone and reticulation continuing on from it. So too many pieces, move it over. Get those out of there. So let's see, I am going to cut out this template and then make one of them in a 22 gauge sheet and one of them out of my reticulation. Except that the sheet one I'm going to make extra big because I need to put down my frame onto it. So I'm going to make it a little wider than I've got here. And I want to mark for myself where my cutaway works, where the edges are of the groove. So we've got out to here, to here, roughly. Okay, so that represents where my druzy hits. A little bit wider than that, actually. So let's see what that does for this piece. I'm cutting a little bit away from the edge because the edge tends to have a lot of ripple in it, and it's already going to be challenging enough to get this piece edged up against a flatter line. But I am going to cut it with shears because that makes me happy when I can do that. Sawing reticulation is a pain in the butt. As it gets little hard spots like right there. So immediately we have, let me put that against white paper for you guys. Immediately we have this I'm gonna wipe off the alcohol because it becomes a little distracting, but it's because I made it a little too big, that's why. Take that down a smidge. So right now we're looking at that. Still needs a little trimming on the bottom edge. Just get that shape a little smoother. And if we start to layer in connectors, then it's about how do they rest near it?
Mhm.
Are they gonna fit like that? Are they gonna fit curling up? This is where it starts to get into the what are we positioning where? But before I do that, I think I want to lay out the cutaway, see how I feel about that. And this is going to be tricky. I don't have any magical tips for how to trace the shape of your druzy. I'm going to try and do a pencil rubbing of it, basically. See if I can get anywhere. That's going to slide around on me. See if I tape it down, maybe I can get it. Being horrible to these poor shears by cutting other things with them than metal. There. Well, it's kind of working. So what that got me is the outside frame a little bit. Teeth. And the rough shape of the druzy's funky boundaries. Which, in order to get where I want it. So here's what we're talking about if we go negative space. The white becomes the cutaway. Let me zoom in a little bit because you guys are not really getting great picture of this. Put that gray back behind there. So here's what we're looking at. And it's not grabbing me 100%. There's still something not enough for me. And it may be that I need to see the cutaway to really feel that negative space. Or much like our exercise that we were just talking about, the two ammonites, I may just need to separate them, right? I may need to do some kind of interesting wire connection between them. Let me get some scrap wire.
Yeah, I don't see the opening.
Pardon?
I don't see the opening. I see
The
a
white
spout.
here, this
I
white,
mean, no, I see what you're saying and I see
Oh.
the white, but when I look at it like this, I don't visualize it being cut into. I visualize it being solid.
your picture, you like it connected like that, you mean?
I like it separate and no hole, no cutout.
Ah, you mean if it's gonna be separate, you wanna see the whole thing?
Yes.
So then the question is, does it need gold? Or possibly silver? And that's in a high polish there. Didn't I cut out a silver one? Oh, I did. I can do another one. Get my high polish version of that.
What if you just like not put the little piece of gold in the middle and then work with the gold on the outside of it?
You mean that the boundary is gold?
Yes, like the bezel or whatever it was that you were putting around it. If you want to give it a mixed metal.
Yes, this to me takes, so this is such a delicate crystal that
Mhm.
it's taking away from the edge, it's taking away from the weight of the piece, or rather it's overweighting it to that side. So I'm looking for something that creates a balance between the two,
Mhm.
either through the negative space or through some alternative material fitting in there. So that's why my instincts are heading towards having something there. I'm just not sure what yet. So even that little bit of putting a higher polished silver, stay.
What about a wall, like what you do with your hollow forms? Just put a wall under
Could
it.
be.
Because I think that it's the thickness that also is something that from the stone, the
The
druzy.
height of the stone. So you're saying you
Yes.
want to see it like that?
I mean, separate and then maybe adding a wall to it, I feel would balance it somehow versus because of the shape and the size of the stone and the
So
shape and the side of the reticulated piece.
see if I can find some scrap thick stuff. So,
Like I want to give it a wall to balance it with the druzy on the bottom of the reticulated form. At least partially or something.
it's not going to stand up without my fingers there. Some kind of wall.
And one, I think that the gold makes everything too yellow, and I love the way the gray really lets us see the colors of the quartz.
Yep.
I'm wondering if maybe offsetting those two pieces and with the space in between might spark interest.
So that I'm liking this offset, or do you mean
Right.
this direction offset?
But both. I like the center offset, they're separated, and then maybe even minimally. I like it with the reticulation up top, above, but that idea, yes.
So I don't think
No, the way you had them, yes. So, instead of in the same plane, the reticulation is, 3 millimeters above. Yes. And
So
then
I'm
how,
doing the wall, which goes, I don't think I want this tall of a wall, but I'm liking the framing. So I'm thinking that the rectangular wire frame that I was talking about being around all of it, being around at least parts of it would be really intriguing. But we got to also think about what is the next step of the chain.
yes.
And we have to be willing to reject things too. I've been sort of hooked on this chain doing those connector things. But it may be too Wonder Woman by the time it's, this is a little bit Wonder Woman W's, unless I start playing around with how it meets up. And the
How about
side.
if you add in the middle between the two, that size of wire somehow?
Yeah, there's gotta be a connector, and I was looking for some scrap for that. Because I don't have a whole
Like
lot
a
of
ladder or some kind of,
yeah, for my mind, it would probably be 3 pieces or 5 pieces, because I never like even numbers on that kind of thing of wires. Let me see. Oh, I've got a pile of wires I can play around with. A sec. It should not have made it into my garbage pile though. I don't think I like half round. Could go with some square wire. Connecting them.
Yes,
yeah,
you need that height.
yeah. That carries the wire from the chain all the way through.
Yep, although now it makes me kind of want to switch these pieces to rectangular or square wire.
Well,
Because I think
maybe.
I like that there is curve. And I like the connectivity, but now I'm like these straight lines add a whole lot to this visual. I'll scooch them up a little bit so that we have that offset we were talking about.
But they're not fighting. I just felt
Right.
like when you had them so close, they were almost fighting for each other.
Yeah, I
you
agree.
know.
That was what was bugging me. It was becoming a smile instead of 2 pieces. But also this is becoming so interesting as a centerpiece that I may need to save this chain idea for something completely different. Like this may be too much chain for what I'm working on, or it may be the scale is off.
What if you took one of those pieces and set it where the 3 lines are? Something yes. I like the lines, but I also like what you were doing before, and I'm wondering if there's a way to have a triangle in there that makes you happy.
So the triangle is, until I can find the right shape, the triangle is gonna compete a little with the opening here. It would have to be a partial triangle, I think, like
Right.
there.
Or in direction. Right, exactly.
Oh,
Somehow
guys, you know what this means though? This means that has to have a clasp point. This has to clasp in front, hooking behind that thing. Whoa, this is changing a lot.
it wouldn't necessarily have to be a clasp, depending on, it's a little hard for me to know, is that something that's 1 inch across, 2 inches across? If it's bigger than 2 inches, then that might be more than you want. But
ruler. There we go. My ruler's buried.
yeah, I'm just thinking that the other pieces you started with for the chain are nice and they're interesting, and the positive and negative spaces, it's appealing. So if there's a way, even though those straight lines look good, they're totally far away from what you started with the chain. So I
Yeah.
was just thinking how to bring it back to that, because I know how long this all takes. How many more hours are you? So doing something in that center space that has a triangular element without, you know, sort of crossing everything else out, you know what I mean?
So you're right, and I'm really liking that, and I'm really liking the idea of it becoming the clasp point, actually. But let's talk about what happens when I start off balancing, because I had been doing equal sizing, getting smaller. But if this becomes the center point, then it becomes more interesting to do small on one side and big on the other. So this has the weight of the stone. Oops, I'm a little out of range for you guys. Let me back up a little bit more. So here we have one of the challenges, and I think it's part of why Carmen is talking about needing this to be lifted up, is that this has more weight to it, even though it has transparency. Whereas this has the heft of the metal, but it's feeling lighter right now. So if we start trying to counterbalance that weight differential and sort of embrace it, then we start to move from having what was originally going to be, coming across and getting bigger, bigger, small, smaller, smaller, smaller. What are my others? That's the other big one.
No, what you were doing before was right. That
Yeah,
is,
it was more interesting, right?
yes, and also
So-
the counterbalance, having bigger go up the quote unquote lighter side
Yep.
to balance, because really literally if you draw a line from the druzy up to what's that point on your shoulder,
Yep.
having it, that helps balance.
So this becomes a much more interesting necklace if we start to counterbalance it. And then my challenge is, how do I transition between the large and the small? And if I were not to do a clasp up front, it could be chains between them, a couple of chains that become the clasp. Or I find a medium to small projection down around the neck. But this has some really intriguing possibilities. I'm just checking what time we're at. We are at 6:05. Okay, so we got some more time. This is getting much more interesting of a piece than it was, gang.
Mhm.
And now you don't have, if you use those pieces with your original intent as part of the necklace, you don't have to backtrack so far.
So for me, certainly I understand the impetus of that. But for me, if I have to backtrack to get it the way it needs to go, these pieces aren't wasted. They're an interesting component for a different necklace at some point, right? It's rare that if I've gone that far in a project that I'm not going to do something with them. But so my question is, do I stay with this, or do I go scrapping the curves and work on equivalence in the linear? Because I dug both. I really liked this straight line countering the curvature. There's something fairly intriguing to me about that, but I don't know what it speaks to in the larger chain.
I would take a picture and then play around
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then come back to it, because sometimes you forget. I
Yep.
do.
I absolutely need to do that. I think I want some framing on this no matter what I do, because I'm
Mhm.
not a fan of this rough edged, like warpy look. So I need something clean to close it off. So
I think Carmen's right, that it needs to be higher. Maybe could you do those rivets and have 2 layers like she did on hers?
Again, rivets are not so much in my style of work, so I'm not sure that I would choose to go that route. But I may be able to either do a hollow form, or the frame itself will create that height. But either way, what I want to do is close off this edge. And I think that will give it that sense of height. But I don't
Yeah.
think I want it this high. I think it's more about, it's the height of these little stems that I've got in here is more what I'm looking for. So I'm finding this thin square wire very appealing because
Yeah.
of the big weight of these. But it doesn't go well with the round wire connectors. So if I were to do something with that, I would need to change it out. Do I have more square wire scraps? maybe not. Rectangle wire. So I might have to make something out of square or rectangle wire that does an equivalent. Or I may find that once I've framed this, that it really is so centerpiecey that I want something simpler in the chain, except that there's something incredibly appealing about that counterweighted large to small thing. So there's a lot of moving parts to this one, Yang. There's a lot of choices to be made. I think I have any other medium sized ones, do I? No, just those super small. I think I've managed to lose one or two of these in the moving back and forth, but I can always make the ones I need.
Okay, you just picked up a piece right next to the alcohol thing. Is that a hollow form thing with the shape?
No, this is the old, that's the old frame. So you could see, and actually we can show what the,
Yeah, I was wondering if. Ooh, see, I like that.
yeah,
Yeah, that works.
yeah, it could be a hollow form. Yeah, I can definitely play around with those. I think the frame might create the same effect if I do it the way that I'm envisioning, which I'm not explaining very well, but and then next largest. Then we're working our way down. It's under here. Then we're getting somewhere in there. Missing one of these, but I'm liking that as a baseline. But now I have to decide whether I'm taking negative space out of this or not.
No.
Strong vote
Even
for
though
no.
that was my idea, I say no also, and I think by either making it very bright or I still don't love the yellow. Are you still thinking yellow?
No, you're right that it comes, so this is a brassy yellow. I would do a blackened Kembu. Let me see if I have others. That's actual gold instead of the brassy stuff. But the other thing is, so this as a standalone piece is sort of giving me a little bit of discomfort. It's a little too much of the whole piece, but if I toss a couple of
Little
old
balls?
set stones on there when it's blackened, just popping
Oh,
up
okay.
sapphires that I have, it adds a little spark of color.
Yes,
Um,
it needs color.
it does need it needs a smidge of color because everything we're putting next to it is making that yellowish. And I think this may not be the color that I need, but there may be a color that will give me the satisfaction of the pop, like a blue or something. Bear with me and I'll see if I've got any stones easily handy that might do the trick. Did I bring those stones? Pearls. Nope. Greens might look nice with this. Nope, still too yellowy. Wonder
Rachel,
if
do you have a Montana sapphire? Those are
I
kind
have
of,
lots of different sapphires, and that's the pile I pulled out.
well, Montana has more of a gray to it, so that
Yeah.
might blend.
See what we got in that pile. Oh, the containers are all stuck. There we go. So we've got some purpley colors in there, blue grays. That's a really elegant color to go with. Sapphire. And some blue greens that I think those are going to start enhancing. Oh, I even have some settings I can play around with to see what they look like. So I'm thinking maybe some tube set, 1 or 2, maybe, well, probably 3, because again, I really like odd numbers. But a little scattering. I don't have another bezel right now, but scattering of those, and then this stuff blackened. And I think that'll pop really nicely.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
All right. So next plans of action that need to happen on this, I need to consider my setting. And in this case, I think I either want to go full wall all the way around, just trimmed down at the front, or I want to go wall with tiny corners coming in just enough to hold the stone. I could do a prong, but I think that's going to be one too many linear elements added to the mix right now, because we're now adding that connector element, and I think it'll interfere. So right now, I think what I'm going to end up doing, and I may change my mind and cut some of it back, but I think I'm going to make a sort of a 2/3 bezel. So the long side, the short side, and then little itty bitty corners coming around. There's a couple different approaches for that. Put my stones back so I don't lose track of them. And too many things on my bench. This is what happens when I come back from a trip. Stone container, there we go. So what I think I'm going to do is build the bezel, and that'll give me a solid baseline, and it'll also let me decide whether I go hollow form, whether I go framed, what have you. And this kind of a setting, if I make it thick enough, it can be just a slight push down, because it's going to be such a heavy wall that it won't move. Or I can just plan on very carefully, like I'll probably have to hammer set it if I go thick, so that it's pushed down enough around the stone. My gut is telling me that I would like sort of walls so that they appear to be standing up over the stone, higher than the stone, which means that I'm going to go fairly thick. I think I may even want to go thicker than, yeah, I think I want to go the next step up. I was thinking 20 gauge when I was first looking at it, but I think I might want to go to like 16. We'll see. And really make it solid. If I have any 16, maybe I'm not going to 16. Let's see what 18 looks like. Oh, 18 will be enough. Yeah, see, that's enough to really show the wall of the stone. So I think we're going to go with that. And of course, I probably don't have enough. Do I have enough? Oh, I do, just barely have enough. So let me get some stuff off my bench. Put some stuff that I need on it. Get a little clearer headed here. Too many tools. I know there's no such thing, but right now they're all on my bench, it seems. Give me a moment while I move some things away. Here. And I don't need my mandrel right now. My gold foil right now. So get rid of some of these scrappy bits. Start with a little bit fresher space. All right, so we're taking our stones, and I am going to figure out where the heck I put my dividers. There we go. I'm looking for my highest point on the stone, and I'm going to go a little higher than that because I want that extra lip. Unless I'm working in gold, I try to give myself a little extra room. So there's my highest spot. I want to open it a little bit above that. I can always file more away. It's not easy to add stuff on. And again, I'm using 18 gauge. And I'm just gonna make myself a good long strip. I don't think I have the muscles to cut 18 gauge with these shears, but let's see. Yeah, no, that's gonna be a saw job. Little saw is shrunk down from traveling. Get it set back up. A little heavier than my usual 2/0 when I'm this heavy. I think one. I do have a 1. I'm gonna use a just a 1, not even a 1/0. Get it out. Switch over to my goggles because my nearsightedness needs things not in the way to see. And I'm just gonna do a hopefully nice straight cut on this.
Can you pull your camera over a little bit?
Say again?
Can you pull your camera?
rotate? Yeah, sorry, I thought I was in camera. There you go. So with many of us were taught when we were first taught to saw that you only go directly upright. As you get towards thicker material, sometimes cutting it at an angle first and then upright, an angle first and then upright gets you your line follower a little bit smoother. So I tend to do a tiny angle, cut a little ways, then straight. When it usually at 18 gauge or higher, I use this approach. Everything else I find is easier if you're going in a straight saw.
Great tip.
Pardon?
Great tip.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was one of those moments that I realized, you know, I know that they told me I had to saw this way, but it works better. Like there's people out there that saw with their saws completely upside down. Works for them, go for it. As long as you're not damaging other people's tools or yourself or other people, do what you gotta do. Also, the length of your saw stroke, you know, you'll get more out of your cut the longer and smoother you can make saw stroke, saw stroke, that's hard to say. But if the only way you can do your sawing is a little tiny bit like this at a time, and it gets you straight lines, that's great. Do what works for you. Saw is too shallow to do this. I needed a longer saw. Hang on a sec. Also, if you aren't familiar with it, you should always be sawing even when you're backing out of something. I'm gonna have to do the tricky go from both ends and make sure you meet in the middle maneuver. And be careful you don't cut yourself on the other side. All right, so we have a band of metal, and I'm going to need to make a couple of bends in it. but they are corners, and therefore I'm going to need them to actually have a real corner to them in order to follow this stone. So what I'm going to do is leave myself a little more than I need hanging over, because I don't actually want to go beyond the point of the druze, but I need enough to give the fold. So I'm going to mark it with my square. Put the square. So those of you that followed me on the Cogswell project know how much I adore measuring things. All right, and I'm going to use a thin Sharpie, my line. Whenever I'm doing cornering, especially on thick material like this, I am going to start by putting a light saw line. And I do it from both sides, which is a little tricky on the small end of something. I get into some weird positions. Because if you don't do the strokes coming from each side, then one edge is a little more cut in than the other, just by the nature of how we hold our tools. I'm then going to switch over to a triangle file. Even if I'm trying to do an absolute right angle, triangle file is the way to go. Because all files take a little bit more than their actual angle out of the material because of the movement of the teeth, right? We're brushing past the spot that we're trying to cut into. And so by using the triangle file and then only switching over to my square file at the last moment, I don't dig beyond a 90-degree cut. I'm making something that is less than 90 degrees and then finishing it to the 90-degree mark. That'll make a little more sense when I draw it for you after I've done this. This is particularly hard to get both directions on. I'm aiming to go about 2/3 of the way through the material in total to get a good sharp corner. Getting close. Yep, getting close. So then I'm going to take my square file and do the finishing cut with just a few swipes to get it to that 90 degrees. All right, and now I'm going to use my parallel jaw pliers. If I can figure out where I put them. There we go. No, that's not the pair I was looking for. There's no, oh, there they are. So I use the parallel jaw pliers and I put it just to the side of what I've cut. And then I am not bending the pliers to the metal. I'm bending the metal to the pliers. I'm using it as a grip. And if you need to, you can even get in there with a mallet or something and use it just to sort of flatten that square out. See how well that fits my corner. So there is a very good 90 degree, but my corner needs a smidge bit of rounding because it does have a little bit of a curve there. So now that I've got that good corner, I can go in with either my my half rounds or my round pliers. In this case, it's such a tiny curve that I'm going to try this with round first. And I can just squeeze and bend a little bit. And again, I want to do that from both sides. Squeeze and bend, squeeze and bend. And I probably need to put a little bit more curve in the end piece because it is very squared up. Check it. That makes me happy. All right, so we're already starting to see the fit to the corner there. Questions about that? And you guys want me to draw what I was talking about with the triangle and square?
Not for me.
Nope, I got it.
I'm
Everybody
good.
got it? Okay. So now I'm going on to my next corner. And I need to mark the position relative to the stone.
Are you marking inside or outside on your wire?
I'm marking the inside and just beyond the end of the stone, like hair's breadth beyond the end of the stone, because by folding it, I'm going to actually be bending it and closing it tighter. So this is actually even probably not enough of a little gap. I'm going to go a little bit beyond that point.
After you draw it, would you move your left hand so I can see under after you're done?
Yep.
Okay, now say again.
So the stone ends here, and I'm like 0.5 millimeter outside of that. Because as soon as I bend this, it's going to compress and shorten this length. Can I recover from it? Absolutely. It's easier to recover from too short than too long, because I can stretch the material. But I need enough that when I file my corner in there and start to fold it, it doesn't crease too tightly to the end of the piece.
Great, thanks.
Yep. Okay, I'm going to make sure that that is square, because it doesn't look like it's very squared. It was just following the stone. So it took a little bit of a left turn at the top. Now, see my squared up line. Check that. Yeah, I went too far. I'm going to clean this and remark it. Also, I'm using the factory edge down, because why clean up something that you're going to have to solder down if the factory has done it for you? Because it's going to be a lot easier to finish my edge that I was sawing than it is to solder that edge down. Because once it's attached to the bezel, it's a lot easier to clean up. There we go. I'm happy with that.
Rachel,
And
would you put that metal back down and then move your left hand? Okay, got it.
the problem is there's a little reflection here,
Yeah,
but it is really literally like less than, I would say it's a smidge less, right around the 0.5 millimeter mark beyond the tip of the stone.
thank you.
All right, so this one again, we're doing the sawing as our starter. And I put the ruler out, but I forgot to read it off to you guys. When I had the pieces laid out with the bars in between them, the width of the total of the reticulation plus the stone was about 4 3/4 inches wide. So it'll be a pretty consequential neck piece if I keep those proportions. Triangle file. This is a place where I always rush my filing and go off track if I don't remind myself. Like I have to sit here and in my head go, slow down, because I want to file like, I don't like filing. I just want it to be over with. But in order to keep your lines straight and keep the level uniform V going in there, it's about the back and forth and taking your time. Right? Switching over to the square for the last little bit. And this one, we're going to probably, because it's steeper than a 45, than a 90 degree, we're going to probably have to actually over extend it. And we may have to do a cut and bend and a cut and a bend in order to get it to take the corner well. Right? So I'm going to start by using my pliers. Again, pushing the metal to the plier. That gets me to my 90, but I know I need to go beyond that. And I know this material starts to curve because the other side of the stone is curved. So I'm going to take my 1/2 round pliers and start making that bend, roughing in my curve line, knowing that I'm probably going to have to take my saw blade into the actual corner. So that's a pretty sweet little fit there. Can't show it on screen until I can get it positioned, but a little smidge loose. I could have gone in an 1/8 of a millimeter more than I did, but I think I'll be happy having that extra little oomph in there. Right? And
Are you
then
going to solder it? I'm sorry, are you going to
I am going
solder
to
it?
solder it, but I need to get it closed more. So the trick to this, to get it beyond that 90-degree bend that I took, is I now saw down my existing bend carefully. I'm just sawing a light removal of metal, which is an awkward position to be in here. Oh, come on. I'm trying to keep it in some frame that you guys can actually watch while supporting it adequately, which I'm not doing a good job of. So I'm just cutting straight into the corner, even if that's not quite the angle of the original cut. The original cut may be off to one side, but we're just trying to open it up a little bit. And then we're going to take the pliers, grip it a little further up, and bend tighter closed. So you can see I'm getting a sharper point there. We're going to have to play back and forth to get a good tight fit. So now my issue is I've got a little too steep of a curve. There we go. Open that out a little bit, close it back at the point. So you can see I need to curve a little more here and a little less here. So I need to even out my curve. This needs to be flush and this needs to be round. Getting there. Too much curve here still. So I'm going to actually bring my flat pliers in and flatten that again to take some of that curve away. This is making me pretty happy. Now I have the opportunity to bend this one down a little. And I think I need to put a smidge bit of curve in this upper one too. It's going to be a little trickier because I don't have a lot of mobility on a tiny little piece there, but should be able to get something. Okay, so at this point, I need to start marking the spots that need work because I can see, let's see if I can show it to you guys better. I can see that there is a catch point down here. Can't even, so slippery. So I need to get some curve right along here. Mark that. Because there's a smidge little bit of curve and gappage right here and right here. And then I'm going to recheck, but I suspect I'm also going to have to do some work right about there. So this is the kind of thing that if it takes you hours, don't be surprised. Like this can, these tiny little adjustments take a lot of time to get just right. And the better you do it, especially since we're doing an open frame, meaning it's going to not, it's not a bot, we're not going to be able to close it soldered completely before we solder it down to the back plate. We want the fit to be as precise as we can make it so that it doesn't, we don't want it moving around on us. So like that. As soon as I get that little bit of curve in there, it starts to get snugger into the corner. Now it's a little too snug, so I overdid something. What did I overdo? Top is now too snug. And especially when I have a curve, bizarrely, I really like to use my flat pliers to just grip and act as a fulcrum point. I don't always go to my half rounds, although my half rounds are probably my most used pliers. Too far with my curve. So I'm doing a lot of this action with my fingers and the flat pliers. That is looking over curved still. to do to get that to touch down better. Okay, to flatten even further in the middle.
At what point do you feel you have to anneal it?
I don't want to anneal it at this point if I can help it, because I want it to hold its position when I'm soldering it down to the back plate.
Okay.
So I'm going to try to avoid that if I can at all costs. Including if I don't have to do my corner soldering until I'm putting it down, I would try to avoid doing that.
Okay.
Well, and that's the advantage of doing what you can with your fingers as well, because if you're manipulating constantly with your tool, then that's adding that hardness.
Yeah, I mean, both of them will work harden. It's just, you're right, the finger stuff is less likely to do so in a hurry. So this action is not a very tight grip. It's just enough to give me the fulcrum point. So like that grip is not hardening things per se. I mean, might be microscopically. The act of hardening is about the bends that we're doing back and forth. So the more, like if you just sit here and bend, eventually it'll get so work hardened that it will snap at one of the points that you've been creasing. And that's the act that's doing the hardening there, is that bend. So I'm not super, I'm pretty thrilled with the line on the bottom, but I'm not super thrilled with my corner right now. I'm not quite sure what it is that's bugging me. I think it is both too close and too far away, depending on the end. And it's because I can't get, I should have gotten a better curve into my ending before I started the second curve. So let's see if I can improve that at all. Every time I bend that one out, the interior gets a little wonky. My most likely place to break is right there. And that's point. There we go. That's what I'm talking about. Okay, so now as predicted, you can see there's a little bridge action happening here. So I need to flatten that one in a little bit. And then bend back around. Which of course makes there be a little bridge on that side. So this side, up until I get to the very end, is looking pretty happy. I think that I am close enough that I'm going to try and mark and cut, or add, refine the final corner, and that'll give me a little bit of something to finish my curves to. Am I happy? Let's see. No, I still don't like that corner. Got one little bump out that's giving me grief here. Okay, there we go. Bend it around. That's going to hold nicely. And now we're measuring that again, maybe half a millimeter, maybe not even, position just beyond the corner to allow for the bend. Gonna have squeaking just enough material for this. And just so you guys can see it, that's where I am relative to everything else tucked in. This is going to take that fold at that point and bend around. You guys able to see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, so saw time. Triangle file. Oop, I can do my backwards and it shows. There's a lot of gap up at the top. Oh, Rachel, slow. This one is another roughly right angle turn for us. So we're gonna do that whole triangle thing and then squaring up instead of going beyond with the square. By the way, if you're looking to buy tools for yourself and you're trying to decide which expensive ones to buy and which not, files, number one bang for your buck for good quality files. There is a big, big difference between good files and bad files, and that you'll pay for it in time that it takes to get to your project. I just want to get a little bit cleaner gouge in there because I'm sort of going off to the side. Pliers, you can get away with some mid or low range pliers for most of your everyday with a couple really good pairs for the snips and things like that, but files.
Rachel,
Yep.
question on your triangle file. Are you
Yep.
filing across your line or are you a millimeter or so outside of it? Are you trying
Dead
to stay
smack dab on the line.
on the line?
Yeah, so I thawed the line and then I'm running down that same channel first with the triangle file, point down, obviously. And now I'm going across the triangular divot with the square file.
Well, I just asked because I've, been in a number of workshops where they just are off a little bit so they can make that bend. And so that's what I was wondering.
If you are measuring right up to the point, then you would need to be just to the long side of it. But I was measuring, I was building that into my,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, once again, push to the angle rather than the other way around. And here comes the magic question. Does it fit? It does, but it needs more bend. But you'll see that that's getting there on that curve. So now we're going back to parallel, our half rounds to get a little curve in there. It was not in there to begin with. And we're nicely on all the curves. They need a little bit more squeezing in the middle. But now we need to straighten this puppy out. Yeah. Do a little tiny bit of sawing in to get this corner tighter closed. All right, we're looking pretty good. I need to do a little finessing on some of the curves. So this curve needs to be a little bit squeezed in. No, I need a little bit more curved in on that one too. So one of the challenges on a stone like this is that it often has some ever so subtle cutbacks, and this stone on this bottom edge has this ever so slight divot, and then so it goes like this, and then it goes like that up here a little tiny bit right here, and it's given me conniption fits. It's not wanting to be one curve, it's wanting to be two directional curves. So every time I tweak one end of it, it's going the other end is opening a little bit more. And all I can do about it is just tiny little adjustments till I get it there. Okay, now it's beautiful up to that point. There we go. You know you're getting close when the stone sort of holds in place. But I still got that gap. Rawr.
So if you were using fine bezel wire
Yep.
instead of a heavy 18 gauge, would you have maybe considered starting with the center bend and then using a bezel pusher when you needed to move and get the curves you're looking for along the wall of the stone?
No, because a bezel pusher is going to be too aggressive until you're soldered down. Right? Solder, a bezel pusher counts on having something pushing back. If I were doing this in a lighter gauge, I would be making the whole bezel all the way around, soldering it with hard solder, shaping it completely. And I like to use, as my pushing device, I like to use a little piece of quarter round wood block that you can then do this against the stone. It's just that when I don't have a full 360 around it, that's not going to really go anywhere. Like it's not going to give me the push in that I need. There's nothing holding back against.
Yeah, I'm fond of chopsticks.
Yeah, chopsticks are great. Yeah. Aside from occasional splinters. Okay, so I think now my challenge is I managed to torque it a little bit. That's why it's giving me grief on this one side. So it's lifting off on one side. Oh, there we go. That did the trick. Okay, this is making me quite happy now. Right? Nice setting,
Good.
Yes.
good fit. And I don't really have as much material as I needed. I needed like 2 millimeters more, but this is kind of cool. I'm going to keep this and I think I'm going to emulate it on this side because I really only need the little hook around the corner to act as the third point on what's holding things in. So I'm going to stop with that there. Check my flatness. I've got a little bit of warpage in one corner that I need to take care of. It's about how it's twisting. Whenever you have to do some hammering or flattening, you also need to recheck the fit against the stone. It can distort. That's still...
Rachel, we just got a blurb that says charge battery pack.
Oh, goodness. Am I not plugged in? Hang on a sec.
I don't know.
No, that's actually my iPad. It's like saying I'm very low, so I'll go get a charger.
Okay, so
Why would it come up on Rachel's screen? That's interesting.
I don't know. That's not me though. All right, so on this head, this big of a stone, I want a consequential back plate. And I'm going to put this down on, I'm going to do 20 or 22 for this. I think I want to go 22. And I think that's going to be enough. And I always like my back plates to be patterned. And I try to make my back patterns be somewhat thematic. Let's see if I have a scrap of 22 instead of this nice giant sheet I'm about to tackle. I think I do. So, and I'm going to leave myself some room all the way around because we have not yet solved how I'm connecting things. So I need to leave myself some leeway. So I'm going to do a back plate like that. It's also a lot easier to put stuff down on a back plate when you have material outside of where the back plate is. I mean, where the outside of where the bezel is.
I think you need to pin yourself. Something's happening.
Do not.
Yeah, you're right. It's not just my iPad because
Task and
Oh,
power.
I see. I'm betting my power. Hang on. My power is not hooked up for some reason on my. Oh, and I go ahead and disconnect the power source. There we go. It's this camera is not charging. Hang on. That I can solve. Where is my camera plug? It got hooked in my chair and came disconnected. There we go. Boom. Let's see if that comes back. Check and reconnect. Camera turned on. Let's see. Oh, stop shocking me here. Boom, boom. Yay! You guys seeing me again?
Yes.
Well, thank you for that. I would not have noticed that happening, but it was just my cable that was disconnected from the camera itself. Okay, so where was I? I was cutting out an oversized back plate. That I will then pattern, making it even more oversized. Okay, I'm going to quickly pop over to my mill.
And
I
what gauge?
we're set up over there right now, so you guys are gonna do.
22,
Pardon?
22.
Yes, I'm using 22 for this size. That's the lowest I would go for this big of a stone. I have to hop out to the other room for just a sec to get my patterns. I'll be right back. All right, so we got some choices to make. I always like to be decorative, even on the parts that the viewer doesn't see because the customer sees them. And so my back plates are almost always textured in some way. A lot of mine are the brass plates that you can get from FDJ Tools. They're a family-run company based out of Florida. They're very, very helpful, especially if you're shopping for big tools. They can advise on brands and things like that. If you're in Florida, worth a visit. I haven't actually gotten to see them in person. But they're very, like, they've helped some of the schools I've worked for pick things out and so on. So, but I also like to think about thematically what goes with the stones and the look. So I tend to be a fairly geometric gal, and I use a lot of my textures will be some form of moire. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, or textural pattern. But I also like things like this mesh that gets a little crazy. But it has to feel right with the other textures in my piece. So we've got the texture of the mokume, we've got the texture of the reticulation that we're including. This one's sort of a little bit all over the map, and then we've got probably clean lines in the chain itself. So I'm thinking that I either would go extreme floral, which is not a lot of what I do these days, or I might go with something like this, which just has a sort of flowy feel to it. This sort of river pattern of waves, sort of bark-like, river-like. But it's, you know, it's something I do give thought to, is what do I want the pattern to look like? And so I think I'm going to go with that one. I'll be right back as I roll this. Okay.
How do
We got-
you like to protect your mill when you're rolling that?
I am a horrible, horrible person and do not protect my mill very well. So I make sure that it's dry and clean. And then if I'm trying, like, I wouldn't do a steel pattern without some kind of protection. The steel patterns, I'll probably use some of the foam core, but
Yeah.
the brass is not going to hurt the steel of my mill. I know there's all that's kind of like, do you use Windows or do you use Mac? There are people that feel very strongly about always putting something on either side of it. I use the silver and the brass, and that's all.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to use my fancier hammer for flattening this. I was taking this Nicole Ringgold class this weekend at the Metal Arts Guild of Georgia, and I can never remember the name of it, but there's fabulous tools that all they're responsible for is flattening. They're the
Mhm.
something press, arbor press or something like that.
Thumper.
Planishing hammer.
Planishing hammer. Is it really a planishing hammer? That's disconcerting that it's named the same thing as an actual hammer. I every time I use one, I'm like, this is only a single purpose tool, but my God, it's a good purpose. I should really get one.
I bought it for myself for Christmas. It was on sale at
Really?
AutoFry.
Nice. How much was it?
I love it.
what was the price range, if you
You
recall?
know, I know it was way too expensive, so I put it out of my head.
Oh, okay.
I think it was somewhere between $300 and $400.
Yeah, I keep
Was a
hoping I'm
set?
gonna run across one in an antique shop or something.
Yeah.
But
So
it is in Thurston and it's really well made.
Yeah, they're beautiful, but I also have a hard time buying a tool that is really literally for that single purpose, especially because I do have a hydraulic press and I could flatten my work in the hydraulic press. It's just a big pain in the butt to hand
Yeah.
crank the hydraulic press.
Now, once you get it, you'd use it all the
I
time.
know, I know. All right. Very important piece of this is I need to put my maker's mark on at this stage of the game because it will be a lot harder to put it on otherwise. If you fail to do that at a good point, one of the things that I've recently started doing is I've made myself a bunch of the tiniest size of circle punches that I can make out of some of my scrap silver, and I've just punched a bunch of them, and then I
Mhm.
keep a little tin of those, so if worst case is I can solder on a circle with my mark on it. But if I know ahead of time that this is gonna be the piece that I would want the mark on, I'm gonna do it now. So I like to sort of put it in position with the pattern. And grab myself a hammer. You can do multiple taps if you're very careful about it and you just tip while still holding it in position. Because I should really get myself a new mark. This one's getting a little dull after 15 years of use. But I've got it marked. I'm also horrible in that I'm supposed to also put my materials on it when I put my mark on it, and I don't have mark stamps for all of the materials that I'm using. Like this is supposed to be rated at whatever percentage is in that, and I don't know yet if I'm putting gold on it and so on. So
Where do you get your stamp? If you have to renew, where do you order it
oh
from?
so I think it literally was like 13 or 15 years ago that I got this, but there's a couple places that custom make from the I patterned the wrong side. No, I saw the room. Good. That make them from your you send them a JPEG or a PNG file and tell them what scale you want it, and they make it from it. If you drop me an email reminder, I will post it to the Facebook group and put it in my notes to remind people. There's two places that everybody recommends, and I picked one that had the faster turnaround, I think. And yeah, and they'll help you with scaling if you need it. Okay, so I now have my back plate. It has its maker's mark. It has plenty of room around it, and it has a decently flush fit. I'm going to have to do a little bit of holding down with my pliers, but otherwise I am ready to head over to solder, and this will be our last step for the evening. And then that'll set me up for next session for the rest of this design work. You guys seeing my bench? You are seeing the bench. Oops, helps if I actually turn the gas on for the day. And this is one that you have to go in pretty fast and furious because since it is not a closed shape, it's super easy for it to flex. Its main thing it's going to want to do as it heats is flex this way. So watch for getting a good balance of heat before you go. I need to have some hard solder ready because this is my first solder down. And I'm going to be pretty generous with this. This is another one of those people have very strong opinions about where to put the solder. I always put my solder on the interior if I'm not sure whether I'm going to have outer rim or not, especially if I'm not sure. In this case, I've got a clear stone, so this might be one of the places where I would work on the outside first. But that's rare for me. I'm almost always guiding my solder on the inside, so I have minimal exterior cleanup. But I'm 98% sure I don't want frame around this, and I do want as clean an interior as I can for the sake of that really transparent stone that I'm using. I'm going to be using a combination of fluxes. What I put down first was the Prips. Take a moment for the first light of the day. Come on. And we're gonna do double fluxing on this, because the first one's gonna clean up the material. And then the second one is gonna help keep it clean and need some new flux brushes. And in this case, I'm trying to get flux pretty much everywhere. Then I'll reposition my frame. No, right, and I'm gonna be heating a lot of the material behind. In this case, I have to be careful. The material behind is thinner than my walls, making the back plate actually higher risk. But all of it has the potential to work on me. I'm also going to do some gentle encouragement down to the plate in a couple of corner areas where it is trying to lift up. And then I'm going to position my solder. It's a huge solder I cut. But I'm going to position it in this case, again, for the rare opportunity, I'm going to put it on the outside. And one of the things I do with my solder is I position it a fingernail's thickness away from the wall, which freaks a lot of people out. The reason I do that, and it's less important in this particular setting than in many, is because usually our walls are thinner gauge than our back plate. And that means that they are the highest risk of heating and shooting your solder up the wall instead of under the seam. By putting it ever so slightly away from that wall, you give yourself a microsecond opportunity to get the solder flowing and then draw it under from the other side. So you'll see me get the solder going, get the heat going rather, and get the solder flowing, and then I'll pop to the middle to aim for where I want the solder to flow to, because solder follows the heat. So I'm working to heat the whole huge back plate. Not yet really hitting the solder itself, but my hottest spots need to be interior to this wall to draw it inward. And then I want to focus on getting one or more of the pieces of solder flowing. And this is going to be easiest on me if I work on the solder that is most snugly fitted, meaning it's the wall is in a good spot to flow. So it's flush and nicely positioned. My torch tip is really dirty today, so I may have to put this puppy in a sonic cleaner and get it cleaned up after this.
What? You'll have to explain that later.
Sure.
Is that acetylene?
This is acetylene, yeah. And it looks like my tips need real cleaning, because they're burning very, very yellow. Yeah, there's some grub in the tip or on the tip. So flux usually is going to give you some clues to the temperature of the metal. The reddish color usually means it's right close to getting flow point. The bigger the sheet, the harder that's going to be to gauge. You're also looking for the shine. And in this case, I'm just trying to get that solder just to instigate its flow, because it becomes much easier once you've got the first piece going to get the others moving. But I might, this is so big, I might have to move up a torch tip to get my heat spread where I need it to go.
What are you at now?
I'm on a 1, which is my go-to for most things. And I might have to move up to a 2. This is the Smith acetylene air torch. And or I may need to do some underneath action. This is getting really grubby. I'm very much not pleased with this lack of action. Let's see. I try to avoid using any kind of steel enhancement to get the piece up because steel steals the heat. But sometimes on the bigger pieces that you just have to get that bounce underneath. My metal is not reacting at all to getting this heat up. Yeah, gang, I'm gonna clean this up and switch tips because I think I'm just getting too much oxygenation there. But that means that because I didn't get any solder down, when I quench this, I'm gonna have to check it for position again. Because it's now really annealed. And also, yeah, solder just didn't even stick in most cases. But it's all gonna come off when I quench.
Don't rush it.
No, you can't on the big pieces. There we go. There's another scrap. Yep, they all came off. All right, so this has to go into the pickle for a few moments. And while we do that, any questions?
Yes,
From-
explain your tips in the ultrasonic.
Yeah.
Never heard
So
of that.
not all tips are safe to put in the ultrasonic, but the genuine Smith tips, the genuine Smith little torch and the Smith acetylene, I think the propane are okay too, because they're made the same model. So what happens is inside of, especially the Smith little tips, the thing that regulates how much gas is coming out is actually ruby, usually carborundum, whatever the ruby is natively. There's a machined perfect piece in there that acts as the stopper down in the center. Cheapo torches have not high quality things in there and will fracture in the sonic cleaner, but the good quality tips, you put them in the cleaner, you don't want them bouncing around, so make sure they're hanging out in your basket or something in a way that they're not going to bounce. And then you sonic clean them for a while and then pull them out and use pipe cleaners and run through them and then put them in again and do that until you no longer get grub in your water. And then you got to really let them dry out or air blast them. So the thing you have to be careful of is if you do it too often, the little O-rings will start to wear out, but you should be watching for that on a regular basis anyhow, especially on the larger ones like I'm using right now. But generally it's a matter of a few minutes. Like I wouldn't leave it in the sonic cleaner and not pay attention to it. It would be a couple minutes of cleaning and then use the pipe cleaner and then a couple minutes of cleaning and use the pipe cleaner. I will also say that one of the things that is least talked about in training people to use sonic cleaners is that you should never put your body parts in it while it's running. Sonic cleaners are so, people think, oh, it's just going to clean stuff up. No, so sonic cleaners are putting the sound wave, I mean, the vibration waves are coming through. If you have a pacemaker, a heart issue, vein troubles, those vibrations, you're fluid, you're liquid inside. Those are going through you and they're not good for you. And it's one of the things that I get, it makes me pissed that people don't get that training because they think, oh, it's happy, soapy, cleany stuff. It is. Just don't put your body parts in it while it's running, please. So there's my safety tip for the day. Any other questions?
Just when you have time, talk about the O-rings, because I don't know about that either, but
Yeah, hang on, let me see if I can show you one. I actually need to order some for myself, but so I'll put it on the fancy camera because then we can zoom in. Too far. So something I can point with. So these little guys are rubber O-rings that make the seal that when you're putting it down and you're tightening it. And some models also have one tucked up back behind.
you're off camera.
Oh, sorry. Some also have one that's tucked up see this section in here, there's sometimes an O-ring resting between these two, but I don't think any of the Smith models have that. Those are harder to swap out. But these, you can see that you can pull at them. If they're at all loose, you're getting gas leakage out of it. And these,
Yeah.
if you buy like 100 in a pack kind of thing.
Like
They
from
just-
Cyber Weld?
They might have some. I don't know. I've never shopped from Cyberweld, but this is especially for the Smith line. They should be ubiquitous at pretty much any place that sells Smith parts.
Okay.
And then
And there's only one in that Smith one? Is there
this
one or
one
two?
has two.
Two. Okay.
Some models of torch I've seen have another O-ring that rests basically inside this cap, so that the snugness of once you get it tightened down, there's rubberized something right in there. But I don't have any of that kind of torch tip, so I can't show you what those look like, and I don't know if those are as replaceable as these are. And the little torch, I don't have my little torch, it's packed away. I can't remember. There must be some O-rings in there, but I can't remember where. I'm sure there are diagrams on the Smith site or something that can show you. But that is the thing, especially if you've gotten used equipment from somebody, that's the thing that wears out, because they get dry and brittle like any rubber can over time, or if you've splashed pickle around them or whatever. Like especially if you're a drop hot stuff in pickle person, I hope you're not, but that can splash acid into the air in microparticles and start to erode both the steel and the things that it touches. So just be real careful, especially depending on where your pickle is positioned.
So should you check all of your torch tips?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you see any that are either worn or not fully filling their space,
Yeah.
it's worth replacing. The other thing is you'll start to see if you're not having a good fit and you get a lot of the splash at the edges of the tip, especially, and of the torch, of this right here. If you get some splashing out of this, especially as you're closing off, it may be time to check them. Or it may be that you're closing off your gas in weird ways. That's the problem. It's not a guarantee, it's the O-rings. But if you're not getting a tight fit, or if they loosen up on you as you work, all of those it's worth checking the O-rings.
Thank you so much, Rachel, because
I
mine
never
is
knew
doing
that.
that. Yeah.
So
never knew that.
the other magical spot that most people don't learn about, they're definitely on the Smith torches, and it's another one that I'll put on my list to demo later. If your knobs are loose on your Smith torches, that's fixable.
What knobs?
The gas on and off knob on your torch itself, on your torch head. Let me go back over to the torch bench and show you what I'm talking about. Have you worked in a studio where this doesn't want to stay at the level you want it?
Lower it a little bit, Rachel. There you go.
Right? So this is sometimes super loose, or you're working and suddenly your gas is going on by itself because it's just kind of moving of its own accord. There's a little bolt in here. I mean, a little
Bring
nut.
it, bring it down.
Bring it
There
down.
you
Hang
go.
on, move this out of the way. There is a little nut right in here that you can tighten if your knob has been getting very loose. You can pop in there and snug it down. You turn off your gas, you disconnect your lines, and you open this out and then tighten down the nut that's tucked up in there.
Mm.
And then screw it back in and put it all together. I usually always do a line check again with the bubbles and everything when I've done that kind of a take apart, and you can check the surrounding area and check your seals and everything. But yeah, this is my number one thing that I do in other people's working studio. Like if there's a classroom studio, these often get left loose and people are like, yeah, it's starting to wear out. No, it's not starting to wear out. The knob is loose. So check your.
So then another question, Rachel, thank you, because I replaced my tank today. Do I have to do a bubble test around those O-rings?
Around the O-rings, no. Around,
Okay.
so a bubble test is all the places where you should have a seal. So you would bubble check around the point at which the
Yeah.
connections.
right?
Yeah.
You would double check around here
Oh,
when it's on, because it should be a snug on. And if you're seeing gas coming out, then you got big problems because it's gotten past 2 points where there's a control, right? It's gotten
Yeah.
past the main gas tank and it's gotten past your knob on the handle. And so that's bad. That means you got bigger problems than just O-rings, probably, because it means you might have leaks in your gauge, right? Or here's something that I get a lot. The tanks, the quality of the toppers on tanks is garbage. Sometimes they have used them beyond their supposed to be life. And so I have found that sort of 1 out of every maybe 4 or 5 tanks that I get from my local air gas, they push the pressure even after I've got it really, like I've got good hand strength. Even after I've got it really tightly closed, it'll have slow leaks in it. So if you do not have a carbon monoxide tester in your studio, you should. Carbon monoxide testers will usually also catch acetylene. I don't believe they'll catch propane, but you can, for a lot of money, buy propane alarms as well.
no,
I have. Say again?
they do detect the mono,
It-
whatever you say. Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay. So, so I have that in my studio, and I also watch my tank. My current tank, if I wait 2 weeks, as I've done between sessions because I was out of town, it'll slowly try to inch the pressure up no matter how snug I've got it. It's not bad enough that I'm returning the tank, but I have had tanks where I turn around and I'm like, nope, this one is not, it's because it's going to damage your pressure gauges if that happens, right? Because
Oh.
it's consistently pushing at the pressure gauge. While I'm on the subject of those, if you have a 2-part gauge, one that is the pressure in the tank and one that is your pressure for your gas line, and you properly bleed it every time you use it so that they're back down to 0, if you see that the gauge for either one of them does not ever get all the way down to 0, your gauge is on its way out. There are places that can repair them, but you don't really want to keep using it for too much longer without either a repair, or usually the repairs are almost the cost of getting a new one. Get a new one. But watch that. Those gauges tell you a lot about your tanks, but they can sometimes be just screaming, I'm about to die, not the tank, right? It's not always about the tank when you see that extra pressurization. So if you've bled everything off, you've burned everything off, you've closed everything up, and you still have pressure markers above the 0 mark on either of those, watch out. Consider your gauge on its way out. Okay, I've done a lot of yapping at you, and I've gone a little bit longer than I intended to today. Do you guys want me to try and solder down that piece one more time, or do you want to do it at the start of next session?
Next time, for
Yeah.
everybody's sake.
Yeah,
Okay,
I'm
good.
ready to go.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
just
I
scared
am
me to
too. I've
death
got
right now, so I'm gonna have to look at my gauges.
So don't be scared, just be wise about it. Just like do your due diligence on shutting things down properly and making sure that you've done your bubble test, and just be healthy about it. It's, if we use them right, the tools are safe.
Yeah, I
So.
just replaced the hoses because they were old, so I just decided to replace the hoses.
Not a bad call. Rubber gets worn over time. All right.
How old do you see? What do you consider old?
It depends on how they've been treated.
Oh,
Like if they've been out in a plumber's truck in the weather for 10 years before you got them, is a different story than mine sit tucked carefully under my desk. So I haven't bought new hoses probably in 10 years, but I'm also and the climate's going to impact it, how dry that you can tell when it starts to get brittle, or if you get fray. Every once in a while, somebody on a Facebook group will say, oh yeah, you got fray at the ends, just tape it and redo the end onto. I'm like, no. Manufacturers clamp it and put it in, like, don't self-repair your hoses. Your life is worth the $20 or whatever it's going to cost to get a new hose. So just be cautious about it.
so you don't have to replace the whole thing. You can switch out hoses.
You can absolutely switch out hoses. Yeah,
Yeah,
a single
that's what I
hose
did,
or a
switched
pair
out.
of hoses if you're doing an oxy-set combo or whatever. And what you get is everything up to and including the nut on each end that swaps in. Now, I'll say, if you bought one of the cheap Smith little torches, those are connected to the Smith and they're not separable. Like that's one of the reasons I go with the higher quality equipment is I want one that I can swap out the parts on. But I've seen a lot of the knockoff Smiths, it's all one unit and you're basically buying a new one to get the safety factor. But my vote is don't buy the cheap knockoffs to begin with.
No,
Right.
no. Mm-mm.
Okay, if you are in the Portland area or planning to be in the Portland area this weekend, I am at Gathering of the Guilds at the Portland Convention Center. Me and 320 something of my favorite local artists from the Pacific Northwest Guilds. And there's a whole section just for the metals group, so you get to see 30 something of us all in one place. It's a fun show, it's free. Come on down, say hi. And after that, I'm going up in June to Edmonds, Washington. And then back down to Bend for Art in the Pearl. So I'm doing a lot of Pacific Northwest shows so far this year. I'm hoping to hear from a couple a little further afield. And also I've got my 2 classes for the fall season up on the website. And otherwise,
What are
pardon?
the classes? What are
the classes are clasps from simple to structural. I haven't decided what my 3rd big clasp is going to be yet. So if people sign up and want to suggest something, I can take recommendations. And then a hollow forms class. And the hollow forms class may or may not move dates back into November, depending on what shows I get into in November. So,
Did you already talk about your trip to Southern California?
I didn't end up going because we did not get the numbers to run the class. I was very
Oh.
disappointed. Yeah, we
Oh.
only had half the numbers. She's been having a hard time getting some of those sessions set up. So a couple of folks are either having to cancel or they're pushing hard to get the last few slots filled. Unfortunately, because of the size and location and the expenses, she needs to get very full classes to run. So we tried playing around with numbers and me taking a reduction but we weren't hitting it. So I was very bummed because I love teaching that class in person.
Mm.
So, all right.
Okay.
I'm seeing some stuff in the chat. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Put places you know of in this chat to donate jewelry. Pat, I will take a note to make a list of those and put them up on the Facebook group. So I got a lot of notes I got to take. Donate to charity, torch fixes. There was something else.
Stamp.
Mark.
A stamp.
Mark, yep, the stamp. And donation. Carmen, that's a fabulous use of the extra materials, is teaching people how to use them in their jewelry. That's great. All right, gang. On that note, thank you for hanging out and giving me your feedback. I'm excited to see this new version of this project as we move it along. I'll
Yes.
see you.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Night.
Nice seeing everyone. Take care.
Thanks.